A Correctional Officer's Challenge. Does abuse or neglect lead to violence? By Carl R. Torsbens, former Deputy Warden and Trainer in New Mexico Corrections Department and Arizona Department of Corrections. The introduction. It's been alleged that the riot at the Mississippi CCA prison was caused by officers for systemic abuses and neglect by organization and employees. Not wanting to get into this allegation without any evidence to support either side, wrote an article related to those issues within a jail or prison where officers put their lives on the line for the sake of public safety and trust, whether public or private. The challenge is the same. Correctional and detention officers have a tremendous challenge while doing their jobs inside a large jail or prison. Their role is to balance the needs of the public and those jailed prisoners entitled to basic and civil human rights treatment under color of law. Hired to protect the inmates from harm either from themselves or others, it has become more evident this role has often been compromised by cultural interferences and barriers that has changed the tolerance levels experienced by officers while doing their job. Remember, their job is to protect and serve. Of course, the public is their number one. Number two is themselves. Number three, the prisoners that they are in charge of by law. We have already established a lawful conduct by doing what is written by law, policy, customs, and traditions, empowered written guidance to enforce rules fairly and with due process. This is an expectation of all officers to follow. This is what we call the job. The job's already been established. The conditions have already been written. All we need to do is follow them. Simply put, a correctional officer may abuse and neglect a prisoner in many different ways. The most common are sexual abuse, psychological abuse, for example, verbal taunting, physical abuse, for example, excessive force, neglect by withholding those basic rights given by law, and the failure to acknowledge or report an assault, whether physical or sexual in nature. These are abuses that we know exist. In defense of some of these actions, there are factors not often brought to light when it comes to correctional officers' misconduct or alleged misconduct. Many of these factors are well beyond the practical or realistic controls of the officers involved and lay somewhere between the upper management decision-making and the ability to provide the proper tools and resources to do the job right. Thus, there is a catch-22. There are also circumstances where these officers are put in a catch-22 by their supervisors or managers who moralize these high levels of tolerance, approach, and attitudes that endorse such conduct on a daily basis. You got to remember that dynamics inside of a prison or jail are very, very powerful. Their reinforcement of such practice, along with suggestions, tacit approval, or their refusal to correct such conduct, code of silence, leads to more violence and most likely injuries or death to either the prisoner or the officers engaged in these violent behaviors inside the jail or prisons. Remember, these are the dynamics I was talking about. They can lead to injuries. This is where the culture prevents better relationships to exist between the officers and prisoners, who they can then communicate and exchange appropriate environmental needs to resolve their issues. In most cases, certain officers, not always the majority, can do and abuse their authoritative powers and mistreat prisoners thinking it's the right thing to do. This is very interesting here because they think it's the right thing to do. Under many circumstances, this was a direct result of how they were mentored or empowered by those who trained them, supervised them, or even hired them. Sometimes the lack of an education and the lack of awareness of what you're getting into is going to impact your decision making. It's likely these flaws can be traced back to the organizational hiring practices, training, their background checks, the lack of thorough physical or psychological testing, and in some cases, obvious sense of authority with a badge over the rest of the persons in their care, and the fact that management appears to be condoning such misconduct as normal and routine. The word here seems to be condoning such misconduct. What often exists within these high-tolerance institutional cultures is the lack of consequences or disciplinary action taken when such a cultural approach is revealed or taken, and therefore assigned for other officers that what they're doing is approved by those in power or those in charge. HTIC, high tolerance. Many of those officers who commit or engage in wrongdoings were trapped while engaged in the acts of abuse and neglect by not co-workers reporting the incident, but rather they were observed, taped, or reviewed under the scrutiny or observation of surveillance cameras and other electronic devices that record such activity and are difficult to control once retrieved and reviewed. It's not an entrapment. Everybody's aware these cameras are there. This can be contributed to the fear of retaliation, ostracization by fellow officers if labeled a snitch or rat on other officers. Thus, the code of silence is very effective, and the challenge to the officer's dilemma is to break this vicious cycle of abuse and neglect through the development of a safe environment where speech and reports are allowed without negative consequences. Peer pressure is a big factor. To create a safe zone without negative repercussions of intimidation or fear of being punished or harassed, causing severe humiliation and eventual discharge of the job, either voluntary or involuntary, because of peer pressure and culture banishment tools, is a reality that officers have to deal with inside prisons and jails. It's not as easy as you think it is to work as a correctional officer or detention officer. It is with high hopes, this video of awareness, that prisoners do have basic civil rights and are granted by law both dignity and humane treatment while incarcerated, and that those officers who have sworn an oath to protect and serve the public do so accordingly to their laws, their policies, and their adopted customs and traditions that have made corrections a profession and not just a job. It is also hoped to realize by those viewing the video that there are some correctional practices in place in most jails and prisoners, and if management and supervisors endorse these sound practices and avoid deviating for personal reasons such as biases and opinions, jails and prisons will be run safer, smoother, and better. Within the safe zone, other officers will fall in line and get the job done the way it's designed to be done, lawfully, and reduce violence in the workplace through fostering a safer way to do business and through open communication from the top to the bottom and from the bottom to the top. It's not always a clear chain of command there. It goes from top to bottom, bottom to top. Everybody needs to get involved and create a safe zone. Be safe.